Well, let me add my good morning to those who preceded me, and to thank you all for being here. You've traveled a long way, I think, in many cases to get here. I just was thinking as I was walking up here, this is my second of 4 trips to D.C. in a 4-week period. So when you live in Oregon, maybe I have to rethink my priorities here, because this is a lot of time on airplanes. But I did want to be here with this group, and I wanted to share with you very kind of rapid-fire, kind of high-level overview of the complexity of college and career readiness. And I chose that title because what I don't want to do is fall into the trap where I think we're falling into in some places, which is in policy circles, sometimes the number one priority is to solve a problem. It's not necessarily to get it right. It's to solve the problem. And part of solving the problem is specifying it in a way that it can be addressed pretty easily in the policy process. And I think some of what we're seeing in the college and career readiness area right now is a tendency to try to encapsulate this, put it into a form that is amenable to solution by policy fairly simply, and then, wash your hands, move on to the next policy problem, which is how the policy system operates. Unfortunately, we've got a real complex situation, something that has been kind of building for 200 years in the U.S. in a sense, because we never designed our educational system to prepare everyone for post-secondary education. We have purposely and consciously disconnected our educational systems at every level in a way that almost no other country in the world can match. So in that sense, we're number one. But it's not necessarily the number one that we all want to be pointing to. Now, as the economy has changed, as our social needs have changed, and the structure of our society has changed, we find that what we need is an aligned, connected system that creates the opportunity for all students to receive an education that enables them, if they choose to do so, to continue learning beyond high school. That's the heart of my definition. That's the heart of the policy issue, and that's the heart of the problem at the same time. So with that, let me just kind of walk through then some of these issues relatively quickly. I think we would all agree we've entered a policy environment that is focused on college and career readiness. The name has come up even to the point of if and when ESEA is reauthorized. It's one of the potential names for, if we rename the Act, it could conceivably be the College and Career Readiness Act. That much of a focus. We know in the waiver process that folks are adding college and career readiness components. And states are doing this, I don't want to say grudgingly, but I'll say grudgingly, because it means them having to connect with between high school and college. And the people who are writing the waivers are the K-12 folks. And to think about college and career readiness means they have to talk to their post-secondary folks. That's not something that they do naturally or normally. They don't have the forums for it. They don't have the connections and the relationships. And particularly for substantive conversations, as opposed to debating budgets, there just aren't the means and the mechanisms for doing this. So the waiver process has created some interesting dilemmas. The ESEA reauthorization, I think there's relative bipartisan agreement in principle to the idea that all students ought to be ready to keep learning beyond high school. We've seen the occasional blip on the political radar screen in that regard, but for the most part, I think it's an area that it's very promising in terms of its potential for bipartisan agreement. We're seeing individual states on their own launching out and creating college and career readiness goals, and very often they're tied to a cut score. I'm going to come back and talk about that a little bit more, and suggest that even though a cut score might be a useful policy instrument, it's probably less useful at each level you drop down in the system. When you drop from the state to the district to the school to the classroom to the student, a cut score becomes more and more limited and less informative of our decisions and our actions. And yet, if we set it at the policy level as our sole indicator, the likelihood is it's going to trickle down the system in just the way that I described, leading to largely inappropriate uses that will not help us to achieve our goals. So states are moving forward, but they're not moving forward necessarily in complex notions of college and career readiness. In fact, they're going the opposite direction. They're trying to simplify it. The Common Core state standards clearly reference college and career readiness, but as I could share the validation committee that reviewed those standards and the process that was used to develop them. But one of the issues is it's really kind of, even within the Common Core, it's kind of unclear exactly what they mean by college and career readiness. Although I can make a pretty strong case that they probably have the right elements, I think their specification is somewhat ambiguous. And this leads then to ambiguity with the Common Consortium assessments. You're familiar, I'm sure, with the two national groups of states that are putting together assessments under the sponsorship of the U.S. Department of Education. And those assessments have with them a certain amount of a challenge of trying to clarify their focal point on what actually college and career readiness consists of. And the challenge for them is that they test only English and math. And even though we know it takes more than English and math to be ready for college, there is nevertheless a tendency for us to back in to the assumption that if we can get those tests right and get the cut scores on those tests right, then we've established what college and career readiness is. And I'm just hearing more and more of that floating around. And even though people periodically correct themselves and say, well, this is not all there is, then they'll go right back to saying, well, but this is going to be the cut score and this is going to be college and career readiness. So I'm asking, when I picked the title on purpose, the complexity of college and career readiness, because I want you to be aware that when you hear these conversations, that you want to be careful not to subscribe, I think, at least certainly without, giving it some thought, to the notion that a couple of scores on a couple of tests are going to get us where we want to be and solve the problem for all the kids in this country. For me, the complexity part gets at the fact that college and career readiness are major policy goals, but we're not clear on what we mean by the terms. And Betsy Brand and I were talking beforehand about the fact there's probably half a dozen different efforts out there right now to define college and career readiness. They all have some common components and they all have some distinctive elements. So we're at this phase in the policy process where we're into this what's called issue definition. And we think if we can define it, then we can solve it. In fact, you have to define it, and nevertheless, with this issue, it's going to be a complex definition. The authors of college and career readiness standards assume the mechanisms that standards and assessments are going to drive curriculum and instruction that will lead to more students being ready for post-secondary education. My point to you will be that standards and assessments are necessary but not sufficient. There's way more to it than that, because college and career readiness are way more than just a particular identifiable set of content knowledge skills. When we were doing state standards and state assessments, we lived in a smaller universe. We lived in a self-referential universe. In other words, the state standards were the definition of whatever it is we were defining, and the state tests were the operationalization of that definition. And the definition was some sort of a well-educated person. The problem with college and career readiness is there's an absolute reference point, which is what it takes to be ready to go to college and what it takes to be ready to enter the world of work and pursue a career pathway. There are specific things you must do. It cannot be self-referential. It references a subsequent state of being. So standards and assessments are the beginning. Curriculum instruction help get us there, but there's more to it than that. And as I've noted here, it's more than a single score. I'll also note that college and career readiness are similar. They're not exactly the same. Notwithstanding some publications that came out 5 or 6 years ago that suggested because some alignment could be found between two sets of standards, a work set and a college set, that we'd solve the problem. I don't know if you had a chance to pick the article up outside. Could someone have a copy of that? You just kind of wave for me. Yeah, thank you, Betsy. So it's from this month's issue of Education Leadership. I authored an article called College and Career Readiness, Same or Different, I think is the name of it. Thank you. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. It gives a little bit of history in the background of how we reached the conclusion that they're the same. Well, our work suggests they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. And I think it's a useful and valuable distinction to make that actually creates a more inclusive set of possibilities for students than a less inclusive one. It creates the opportunity for us to identify more students as successful and give them valid routes to positive and promising post-secondary opportunities than a more narrow definition that will, by its very nature, cause some students to be identified as failing and not meeting a standard that, if we use a more inclusive mode, I think we can find a way to validate their efforts, their skills, their capabilities, and their interests. So my point is that success in post-secondary education is a function of readiness across multiple dimensions. Now, people don't like to hear this because the more things you add, the more things you have to do, and the more things you have to measure. Nevertheless, if we think about readiness, though, as alignment among students' skills, interests, aspirations, and their post-secondary objectives, and not just a test score, you see it takes us in the direction of saying it's likely that different students are going to have slightly different constellations of skills and knowledge And as long as they've met a certain floor, now we can't have some people who are just great at something and then they can't, read, or they're great at reading and they can't do any math at all. There's got to be a floor, but once we pass that kind of foundational level, the idea that a well-educated population is one where everybody can do calculus is probably not realistic, valuable, or even worthwhile as an overall policy goal. What is worthwhile is to have different profiles of knowledge and skill built upon sound foundations that will establish the capability of all people to be lifelong learners and adaptive citizens. We do not want to exclude anyone, and we particularly don't want to set arbitrary standards that cause some people to be identified as failing or as not meeting the standard, when in fact they have compensating capabilities that will allow them to be successful in their lives. And if you think about yourselves, I mean, a few of you in this room are probably Renaissance people, but most of us are stronger in some areas than in others, and we play to that. We go through our lives with adaptive strategies that allow us to utilize our strengths and compensate for some of our weaknesses. And we may periodically address those weaknesses and improve, but we know we're not equally prepared or equally competent, capable in all areas. So let's make sure that when we think about students, we're thinking about their skills, interests, and aspirations in relationship to their objectives. Part of that is making sure they have clearer objectives than they do now, and I'll come to that in just a moment. So our current measures are insufficient for determining the alignment because they pick 1 or 2 points, as I've noted before. They might pick an English score, a math score, or they might be a cumulative grade point average, or there might be a list of courses students took. They're just simply not sufficiently nuanced for us to understand what the match is between the student and the interest or the post-secondary goal. In essence, what we have in place is an aspiration gap, because what we've managed to do, we've been successful in one regard in that we've convinced everybody they should go to college, haven't we? I mean, if you ask kids in school, they will tell you that, what's their goal? Well, I want to go to college. And it's sort of like almost, like a conditioned response, right? It's like, what are you going to do? Go to college. I mean, it's not always thoughtful, but nevertheless, we've convinced them. The problem is, as we move through the system from middle school on, what we see is the downshifting of aspiration. We see the continuing lowering of the aspirations of students, not the increasing of the aspirations. We don't see more and more students desiring to go to 4-year institutions and more students desiring to go to even to 2-year institutions. We see it gradually going down, and the largest drop-off, based on our data, where we've conducted using an instrument that we have, that we've administered over 20,000 students, largely in inner-city settings, is that it's poor students from low-income backgrounds and minority backgrounds whose aspirations decline the most rapidly. Middle-class students, upper-middle-class students, their aspirations either hold steady or increase. So think about this. The importance of aspirations are that they set the upper limit of performance, don't they? How likely are you to perform beyond your aspirations? I mean, if you aspire, we don't have any golfers in here, do we? If you don't aspire to break 100, do you do anything to try to achieve that? Or do you just go on the golf course and have, what do they call it, a nice walk ruined? I mean, most of us match our efforts to our aspirations. I mean, would you get a master's degree or a PhD if you didn't aspire to something as a result of doing that? Think about our young people going on to college. If they don't aspire to go on to a 4-year institution or aspire to be having a high level of technical certification, why in the world would they do anything in high school to prepare for that? Aspirations tend to dictate the upper limits of performance. They don't cause it to happen, but they set the limit of the most that the student can be expected to do. So I think it's really important for us to be looking at this aspiration gap. So here's a visual that kind of makes this point. If we start with 100 middle school students, 93 say they want to go to college. We have been successful, haven't we? That's really quite impressive. And these, by the way, these are fairly constant no matter the economic, social environment. Of those, 70 graduate from high school, so that's a 22% drop from the 9th grade. Of those, 44 enroll in college. That's now a 37% drop from those who graduated. Of those, 26 earn a college degree. That's a 41% drop from the previous. And if you'll notice, each one of those numbers is greater. Each one of the percentages is greater than the preceding one. In other words, it's a diminishing returns model. my point is not that every student needs to graduate from college. It's that we are seeing one direction only, which is that we lose students at each step along the way at an increasingly rapid clip. It is not easy to get prepared to succeed in post-secondary ed in this country and to go on and do so. And yet, we've set up a society in which increasingly access to careers and to good jobs is based on certificates of one sort or another. They could be a 2-year certificate. They could even be a training certificate. They could be a 4-year degree. They could be a graduate degree. All of those are certificates in my mind. We've created a society in which access to most jobs requires some form of certification by some sort of educational agency. So thinking about this and the limitations that this creates for the potential for so many young people is one of the real strong rationales of why we want everyone to be able to go on to learn beyond high school. So the comments that I'm making today come out of a number of different sources. That the picture in the middle is for that educational leadership article. That's the issue it came out of. I've also have a number of books on the subject, a couple of which are up there. I might mention the book College and Career Ready. I do talk about my experience being first in family to go to college, which also does shape my point of view. Anyone in here first in family to attend college? Got a few folks. Yeah, well, the book kind of is, in the foreword I write about what it was like to have parents who wanted me to succeed and wanted me to go on, but didn't really have any idea what I should be doing, including not waking me up on the morning I was supposed to take the SAT. So I suppose I should put that on myself, not my parents, but to this, but that's what kids do anyway, is expect other people to help them make good decisions. Getting out of high school and not having any clear goal, and then being fortunate enough to be able to enroll in a community college that was down the road for me, but not having a plan to do it, showing up the first day at the community college with no schedule. I mean, just the list goes on. Sounds familiar to some of you. I can't point to one adult who saved me or anything like that. I don't have a great inspirational story in that regard. I was lucky that the system gave me some options and I was able to pursue them. On the other hand, there were a lot of adults who did challenge me and who helped me get the most out of my capabilities and skills. It takes a lot of things going right, though, to be able, to be standing here as opposed to being, in Santa Cruz, California, where I went to high school, working construction, where a lot of my friends are. Now, I'm not trying to say, they got good lives too, and I'm very, pleased for them. And some days I'd rather be doing that than this, but particularly the days when the surf's up. But if we're going to have young people have opportunities in their lives, we've got to make sure that it's not dependent on happenstance. And for so many of our first-generation students, large decisions end up hinging on small things. They don't get to the community college the day they're supposed to register. They don't fill out the FAFSA. They don't. They get wrong advice from somebody who just tells them, "Well, don't worry about it. They'll give you financial aid, whatever it might be." They make a bad decision taking classes when they're in high school, scheduling themselves based on when their friends are having lunch, not on what they ought to be doing to meet requirements. The list goes on. We have a system in which the probability and the possibility of making mistakes is so great that it is almost assured it will happen for many, many students. I was meeting with a delegation from Ireland about a year ago, talking about this notion of college and career readiness. And I said, so tell me, how do you deal with problems in college readiness in Ireland? And he looked at me and he said, we don't have any. Meaning that the system is designed to where the students who go to college are prepared to go by the time they go. The things they do in high school are carefully aligned with what they'd be doing in college. Students have all the information. The system makes sure that if you need to apply for something, you apply for it. It's not left to chance. It's a very different notion. Now, the difference is, of course, they don't have a system where all students go on to post-secondary education, but nevertheless, the model is such that it's far more it's difficult to go off the path if, the system sets you up for more success, for greater success. Our current model's far more concerned with eligibility than readiness. We want students to take the right courses and write tests, and based on that, they're admitted to college on what I call a hunting license model. As a faculty member at the University of Oregon, when they issue me a parking permit, I now have the right to drive around and see if I can actually find a parking space. When we're admitting students to college, we're kind of doing the same thing. We say, now you have the right to kind of drive around and see if you can find a class that you can pass. And, oh, by the way, maybe you can graduate, maybe you can't, We certainly are not specifying that as a function of admission. I mean, what if we said that? Congratulations. As a function of you being admitted, we are pretty much guaranteeing that we know you have the capability to graduate. Now, you could certainly do things to cause that not to happen, but as an institution, we are sure you are capable of graduating. And I don't think if I put that out there and said, let's put that into the reauthorization of the Higher Ed Act, I think the post-secondary people in this country would be up in arms to say, you can't expect us to guarantee that our students can succeed. It's an odd notion, though, if you think about it, that we're going to admit people where we have no real idea if they're capable of succeeding. Well, as I noted earlier, there's a lot of definitions out there of college and career readiness floating around in the works. Mine is pretty much consistent with Liz's. It's the level of preparation students needs in order to enroll and succeed in a credit-bearing course. Success is the ability to kind of keep on in your program and be progress beyond that. Some people turn that into a letter grade, which is great. I mean, for me, once again, it's more complex than that. It's really the ability to pursue your goal, and it ultimately comes down. It's relative. It's not. It's are you well enough prepared to pursue the goal you have? So many young people go into college and change majors, change colleges, drop out, drop in. It's a very complex model in the U.S. compared to other places in the world. And to our credit, we're a second chance system where you can kind of mess up and still come back and succeed. But in California, they're having to pass regulations because students are piling up 100 credits in the community college and have no certificate at all. They're just sort of trolling about. With the financial aid implications of not being able to move quickly through the system, I think the priority has to be on students being ready to go to college, ready to succeed, do so efficiently, particularly for first-generation students, or else they just won't have a chance, to make it partly for the financial aid reasons. Well, the Common Core State Standards, this slide's got a lot on it. I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time. I just want to make a point with it. The Common Core Standards are aligned to college and career readiness, but they're less clear and precise in their definition of what college and career ready means. Although I've been in plenty of presentations with them, and I don't mean this to be critical, where they just kind of gloss over this. But in the actual document itself, if you say, what does it say about English language arts literacy standards? They say that they define general cross-disciplinary literacy expectations that must be met for students to be prepared to enter college and workforce training programs ready to succeed. The mathematics standards are entirely silent. They say it's access to knowledge and skills necessary in their post-school lives. So I think, the authors and the owners, whoever those might be, of the Common Core State Standards, at some point I need to go back and commit to what these mean relative to college and career readiness, because there's a real implication for the assessment side of the equation. Must every student do all of these to be college and career ready? Are there some? Are there combinations? Would we entertain profiles? Is there a foundational base? What is it? And I don't think we're there yet, and I think that's going to really be the implications in the common assessment is going to be significant. Well, we did do a research study, and one of the principals on that study, Katie Drummond, is sitting over here, and that study showed us that the Common Core standards are applicable and important in a wide range of post-secondary courses. The cognitive challenge is sufficient. They're coherent representation of knowledge. They do not omit key knowledge and skills, and they're a core of knowledge and skills common across general ed and a set of career-oriented courses. And the career areas tend to have very different profiles than general education. You can download this for free off our website, which is epiconline.org. And this was basically the result of analyzing nearly 2,000 entry-level college courses in 25 subject areas. So if you want to get a sense of the relationship of the Common Core State Standards to college and career readiness, I would recommend this report to you. National Assessment Governing Board, which produces NAPE, has a slightly different definition. They talk about preparedness, which is focused on academic qualifications that NAPE measures. And I give them credit, though. They say readiness includes behavioral aspects of student performance which are not measured by NAPE. And I'm looking in the future to make sure when we see these definitions of college and career readiness that it's clear what they are and what they aren't. And if it's a test score, what it measures and what it doesn't measure. What component, what part of college and career readiness does it represent? Another way to think about this is to think about different levels or types of career readiness. And even though this is laid out in a vertical way, there's some of this that probably isn't entirely vertical. But At the first level, we want for students is work readiness, but unfortunately, that's kind of a depressingly low level. It's what when you ask employers what they want from students, well, gee, it'd be nice if they showed up on time. It'd be nice if they didn't get in fights with their fellow workers, and it'd be really cool if they weren't on drugs. But you kind of want a higher standard than that. Job ready is that you've got the knowledge to begin a particular entry-level position. That's really a function of job training, and that's almost always employer-based. Pathway ready is this. Can you go into a formal program of preparation in more depth that leads you to a career pathway, and very often associated with community colleges. Post-secondary ready is can you deal with a wide range of post-secondary courses, and career and life ready is then the idea that you can pursue a career and fulfilling life as a productive citizen. We don't want to ignore the fact that there's more to all of this than just the academic and the work component. So a lot of times particularly when we focus on high school graduation, we're focusing somewhere down around job ready, unfortunately, and that's just too low of a standard and too low of a set of expectations. The model that I use has 4 components. I'm going to talk about this in the breakout session in a lot more depth, so I don't intend to go into it in a lot of detail here. You can find more information on our website as well, along with a narrative explanation. And I've also, there's some other publications of articles that are available on this too. The short version of it is that college and career readiness consists of 4 components: key cognitive strategies, key content knowledge, key learning skills and techniques, key transition knowledge and skills. And you can see a little more detail in each one of those. To summarize them, we use 4 action verbs. You need to be able to think, know, act, go. We find that's useful for teachers and for students, although for some reason people kind of just garble up the order, I've noticed occasionally. But you get the general idea here. Can you think? Can you deal with higher level cognitive processes, and not just sort of critical thinking in that kind of nebulous way, but can you really deal in depth with a series of skills that are associated much more frequently with post-secondary learning? No. Do you have a structure of knowledge? Do you understand the structure of knowledge? Do you value it? Do you attribute your success to your effort? Act. This is really an important one, particularly when you cut across college and career. Do you have a set of learning skills and techniques that you can use that involve owning your learning and then being able to manage your time, being able to study, being motivated to do high-quality work, being self-aware, being a help seeker, knowing how to get help if you need it, being persistent. Some people call it determination, grit, resilience. I've seen a lot of different terms, but can you keep going when you need to, so forth. And then the last one is this key transition knowledge and skills. Can you navigate the complexity of the post-secondary system? And that's what I mentioned earlier. We've got a very complex system. It's knowledge intensive. You talked about your daughter. I've got 3 daughters. My first daughter, I think we did a pretty good job. We got her through okay. She went to the University of Oregon. We're very proud of her. The middle daughter did the same. The third child, we ended up. My wife by then had been filling out applications and actually worked in the high school career center for a while. She kind of knew the system. And so we ended up doing 9 applications and all this jazz. She got into MIT. We're very pleased that she did that. But the one lesson I draw from that is, as a matter of public policy, I think the key really to making sure that students can navigate these systems is to make sure that people have a lot of children, because that way you can get it kind of worked out on the first couple. Anyone know what I'm talking about? And then by that third one, then you know what you're doing. So. So that's the complexity of that system. So think, know, act, go. The cognitive strategies model, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but really it's about how do you utilize a series of carefully developed, systematically created and enhanced thinking skills to deal with complex problems and issues. And this is an example of how you would deal with a complex cognitive strategy. A student would conduct research on natural disasters and choose one and write a policy paper or an annotated outline for a paper. For the Conference on World Disaster Reduction, the paper outlines how to mitigate the impact of this type of disaster and discusses the trade-offs involved with the suggested policy choices. So they've got to formulate a problem, they have to conduct research, they have to interpret their findings, they have to communicate it, and they have to do all that with precision and accuracy. The content knowledge, the Common Core gets you part of the way there, but you've got to think about it in terms of the structure of knowledge, not all the little pieces. And that's really the heart of the problem, If we're teaching kids pieces and parts, we're not getting them to link things together. And the brain just does not remember what it cannot organize. So much of test prep is just absolutely bad instruction because it never lets kids create meaning for what they're learning. And getting them to relate and engage in the content in the lower right-hand side. One of the really key things is attributing success to effort, not aptitude. And I don't know if you know, there's a little story about a volleyball just washed up on the beach in Alaska, and it was from a kid in Japan, and it was inscribed, it was given to him by his friends when he went to a new middle school. And you know what the inscription on the volleyball said? Work hard in your new middle school. Most American kids would not say that, you know. They would say, hey, party hard in your new middle school. It's a different notion of effort versus aptitude. And in this country, too much of the explanation for success and failure is aptitude. So to get students to succeed, they've got to believe that they can do it as a result of working harder. The key learning skills, the ownership of learning, I've ticked off a lot of these. You can see some of those on the list again here. The asking for help. Which kids tend least to ask for help? The ones who need it the most. Who asks for help the most? The ones who tend to need it the least. It's an inverse system. We've got to teach kids how to ask for help. This is particularly true in college, by the way. First-generation students use resources less than the middle and upper middle class students. And then in the same area, the key learning techniques, we don't teach kids to do these things. Some kids learn how to do them, or their parents teach them, or they go to camps where they get instruction or support in this. But the kids who need to know this the most get the least instruction in doing this. And we are just not teaching kids these specific learning techniques. So collaborative learning, for example, working in a study group. Who learns how to do that? Kids who are studying for AP exams. They create their own study groups. My kids created their own study groups. No teachers did it for them. But in college, study groups make a huge difference. And once again, the students who are first generation, low-income ethnic minority tend to use study groups less. So we need to teach kids to do these things specifically. And then the key transition knowledge and skills, a lot of boxes there because there's a lot of things to know. And I won't go into them all, but you can kind of, just glancing at it, you get a list of it. It's fairly daunting. And any of you who's ever worked in a high school, I spent 20 years in public education, anyone who's ever worked in a high school and chased a kid down a hallway to get him to fill out a form, or to go get their transcript fixed, or with your own child, going over the transcript and finding an error and trying to get that repaired. There's so much adult intervention that occurs to make this successful for kids that it's just fairly amazing that the system works at all in some senses. It's very resource dependent, very relationship dependent, very knowledge dependent, and what I call privileged knowledge. It's easier for some people to have this knowledge than for other people to have it. All right. So career, example pathway for college and careers. Here's an example of kind of where the overlap occurs between academic skills. If you look at the learning strategies that you need for a technical degree and how those are similar to what you need for a bachelor's degree, I'm just the one example here. An environmental engineering technician, you can see these are the kind of things they do. They conduct pollution surveys, they perform statistical analyses, they review technical documents, they provide technical support. What kind of skills do you need? Critical thinking, reading, judgment, complex problem solving. Think about how those overlap with what I just showed you in my model. There's an increasing set of core skills, and not just the content knowledge, but those learning skills and techniques, those cognitive strategies, those are the overlaps that we're finding in all three of those areas. And you notice here there's both an associate degree and a certificate. I didn't put a bachelor's degree on here because it's an area where you can do well with less than a bachelor's degree, but look at the skill level it requires to do that. All right. So regarding college and career readiness standards, I've made some of these points at the beginning, so I won't spend too much time here. English and math content standards are necessary but not sufficient. We need cognitive strategies, learning skills, and specific information about transitioning. This one example from the Common Core, you'll notice, read closely to determine what the text says explicitly, make logical inferences from it, cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking. By the way, this is not one standard, it's really three. When people use semicolons to hook stuff together to make it one, and it's not really one, that's a problem. But anyway, take a look at the questions I've asked you are things for you to think about this one standard. What would competence look like? How would competence be different in different types of texts? How would you assess this? And what does this look like across grades? This is worth thinking about when I say the complexity of college and career readiness. You take this one standard, and you take a look at it, you start to break that apart, and you say, wow, what would this look like in terms of performances? And you realize there's a range of performances, a range of texts, a range of ways to assess this. I'm not trying to make this infinitely complex at all, but I'm saying that to do this well, you can do it a lot of different ways, and do it validly a lot of different ways. So no single test can gauge all of what's necessary. Cut scores are appropriate, but they're error-prone when you move down the level toward the individual. And a single score from a single measure is the likelihood that policymakers will end up misusing that is fairly high. Okay. Given the complexity, we should think in terms of a system of assessments rather than one test or score. We've got things like grades already, student self-reports, complex curriculum embedded performance tasks, behavioral assessments, non-content-based measures can help us create a profile of readiness in relation to the goals that students have, and we can give students recommendations on how to improve their readiness in relation to the goals. Increasingly, we're seeing talk of badge systems where it acknowledges what you can do right when you can do it right, and helps to start put that profile of interest together at the same time that we keep working on a core of foundational skills that we don't ignore. All right. Well, with that, it's 10:30, and I think you wanted to take a couple questions, or?
Yeah, we have a few questions. If there are any burning questions from the floor?
Burning or burned out? Well, I went through that fairly quickly, but okay, go ahead.
In the last slide, you talked about a sort of a portfolio of measures that could be looked at as a profile together, sort of creating a complex individual profile of a student. What strategies would you suggest we use in engaging the policy community around trying to elevate the validity of locally assessed, locally judged, locally graded student performance after a decade of obsession with state and nationally validated tests? Also, what advice would you give practitioner leaders as well in terms of trying to create some kind of systemic coherence to engage? Because on the one hand, you've got policy makers who are skeptical of local wisdom, and you then also have the sort of teacher autonomy issue around private grading practice. So what's the strategy for beginning to elevate that whole dimension of assessment?
Gee, that's a little tiny question, isn't there? All right, well, I'll try to do the short version of this answer and do it. I will do the question disservice, and maybe you and I can probably talk later about this. But the short version is, number one, I think we've got to be ready to increase the validity and value of grades. I mean, that's a huge issue I'm taking on right there. But I think allowing everyone to just make up their own standard, in practice, make up their own assessments and their own standards in the classroom and enforce those on students, no one's been willing to take that on. So at some point, that's a huge amount of information that's largely being wasted. We're seeing grade point averages inflated over time. They're one whole GPA higher now in high school than they were in the 1980s. ACT and the U.S. Department of Ed studies have both been able to confirm that. So we're approaching the point where we've added an extra digit onto the right of the decimal point in these GPAs, and now we're acting as if there's a real difference between a 3.42 and a 3.51 or something. I mean, there's no difference in actual performance. So that's one thing. We got to think about that at least. Maybe just kind of wade into it. Maybe have some benchmarking type of tasks that go on in class that contribute to the grades. Increasingly, we're seeing end-of-course exams contributing to the grades. So there's maybe some opening there. And end-of-course exams is maybe another opening. The idea that embedded performance tasks might be a triangulation device. You don't use it as a sole standing measure, but you triangulate the grade against the performance task. If the student does terribly on the performance task, it creates an upper limit for how high the grade could be. I mean, I can think of a lot of mechanisms to where you start putting this together where the policymakers aren't giving away the store in terms of validity or reliability. It's not a validity problem, it's a reliability problem. But we're still moving practice in the direction of being more complex. But I'm also okay with some measures that are just like, did you participate in a post-high school experience? You know, as something that is built into your profile. You have to have it in there. Some things can be dichotomous measures, and you either did it or you didn't do it. And I think within this badge notion, there is space for us to create, if you want to go into a program in environmental studies, you might be expected to have some greater depth in science and some greater evidence that you've done some scientific experiments, for example. So, and I could imagine also having this being somewhat based upon your post-secondary aspiration or interest. So I don't think it's impossible to get policymakers to buy into this. Most of the systems around the world use far more information than we use. This is not as if we're leading the world here at all. And the ones who are more test-happy than us, which are a number of the Asian countries, are all trying to go in the direction of adding more complex information because they have the problem with an effort-based system. What do you think their problem is? The students are topping off these content knowledge tests. They're getting no useful distinctions or discriminations anymore in their pool because everyone does pretty much, they get all the right answers. What they're not getting is a lot of creativity, a lot of kind of problem solving, a lot of insight, a lot of interpretation. So that's the direction it's going. Advanced placement may be adding more, as it does its course redesigns, they're looking at adding more assessments that occur in the classroom by the teacher, but then can get moderated externally, that some of it gets rescored to make sure the teacher's scoring accurately. The technologies are coming. There's a conference in DC next week talking about wider range of measures. The technologies are getting better. There's a lot of other things. You can do situational judgment. You can do self-reports. You can do ratings systems. There's a lot of other things that are out there. We're going to have to learn how to put them together. But that actually is the short answer, believe it or not. So, yeah. I don't want to get you off schedule here, so we just...
Any other questions?
Well, thank you all for your attention. Thanks very much.